He was the ultimate symbol of perseverance, an athlete who outran adversity on carbon fiber blades and captured the world's admiration. But then, on a fateful Valentine's Day morning in 2013, 4 gunshots tore through the quiet of a gated estate in Pretoria. A law graduate and rising model lay dying behind a locked bathroom door, and therefore, South Africa's national hero, Oscar Pistorius, found his entire life catapulted into a high-profile murder trial.
Get right to the latest on Oscar Pistorius, the Olympic hero accused now of murder. This morning,
Nation woke up on Thursday morning to news that Olympic and Paralympic champion Oscar Pistorius had shot and killed his girlfriend in his home in Pretoria.
This is the story of a star sprinter's meteoric rise, but also his shocking fall. A story so layered, so charged, that we must unravel it in 2 parts. Oscar Leonard Carl Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Sandton, Johannesburg, into an Afrikaner family with partial Italian ancestry. But then, just 11 months into his life, doctors amputated both of his legs below the knee due to fibular hemimelia, absence of the fibula bone. The enormity of that operation could have foreshadowed a life of limitations, and therefore, many assumed he would struggle to lead a normal life. Yet his parents, Sheila and Henkie Pistorius, refused to let that define him. They pushed him to engage in every physical activity he possibly could.
She was a really strong, pivoting point in our lives, and she really, made the point of saying, if you want to do something, go, into it full-heartedly, even if if you don't succeed at it, try a couple of times, and if you don't succeed, you can look back at it and say, well, that really wasn't for me, but you don't have to have a regret at the end of the day. And
From rugby to water polo to tennis, friends recalled how he zipped across the field on his prosthetic legs with relentless determination. Indeed, the seeds for an extraordinary sports journey were sown early. Those who watched him grow sensed that adversity would only make him stronger. In 2003, a brutal knee injury from rugby left him sidelined. But then, he found sprint running while undergoing rehabilitation, under the guidance of coach Ampi Lau at the University of Pretoria's High Performance Center. Pistorius discovered an untapped reserve of speed and drive, and therefore, within months, astonishing both coaches and himself, he was ready to race professionally. By the 2004 Athens Paralympics, Pistorius became a sensation, claiming gold in the T44 200 meters with a world record time, 0.97 seconds. The press christened him the Blade Runner, a nod to his J-shaped carbon fiber prosthetics. This was the beginning of a storied Paralympic dominance, including triple gold at the 2006 IPC World Championships. His dream soon transcended the Paralympic stage. Pistorius wanted to compete against the world's best able-bodied sprinters. But then, controversy erupted in 2007 when the IAAF claimed his prosthetics gave him an unfair advantage.
if it was such a technologically advanced piece of equipment that many of the people you interview claim it is, then why isn't everybody running close to the times I'm running on it?
In 2012, after years of grueling training and legal battles, Oscar Pistorius realized his dream. The London Olympics welcomed him as the first double-leg amputee sprinter ever to compete in the Games. Though he didn't medal, exiting the 400 meters in the semi-finals, he anchored South Africa's 4x400 relay and carried his nation's flag in the closing ceremony.
When I was asked to be the flag bearer for the South African Paralympic team, obviously it put a huge smile on my face, and it's a great honor for me. This is going to be my third Paralympic Games, and my first time carrying the flag, so it's definitely going to be a highlight for me.
A powerful symbol of breaking barriers. By then, Pistorius was a global sports icon, netting around $2 million in annual sponsorships from Nike, Oakley, and others. But then, beneath the surface of glossy ad campaigns and accolades, a more tumultuous personal narrative was taking shape. He owned multiple firearms, had a penchant for speed, once crashing a speedboat and breaking his jaw, and faced allegations of careless gun use, firing under a restaurant table, and also firing a gun out the sunroof of his vehicle after being pulled over for speeding. These incidents rarely overshadowed his heroic public persona, and therefore, the world at large still saw him as the resilient Blade Runner, unstoppable and revered.
Hey guys, I'm Reeva, and I'm...
In November 2012, Pistorius met Reeva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old law graduate, model, and reality TV personality. Their romance immediately seized the public's attention, casting them as a glamorous power couple. But then, private text messages later told a less idyllic story. "I'm scared of you sometimes," she wrote. "I can't be attacked by an outsider for dating you and be attacked by you." Still, her natural warmth and activism for women's rights made her beloved by many in South Africa. She looked forward to Valentine's Day 2013, planning something special for Oscar. The couple spent the evening of February 13th at Pistorius's upscale home in Silverwood's country estate. But then, as the night wore on, neighbors would later claim to hear raised voices. Precisely what transpired remains disputed, and therefore the critical events of the early morning hours of February 14th would soon spark the most explosive trial in recent South African history. Just after 3 a.m., according to Pistorius, he awoke and sensed an intruder in the bathroom. Reeva, he claimed, was no longer beside him in bed, but then he did not check where she was. Gripped by terror, he retrieved his 9mm pistol and moved toward the bathroom on his stumps, hearing noise in a locked toilet cubicle, and therefore, he fired 4 shots through the door without warning, killing Reeva inside.
I can smell the blood. I can feel it, the warmness of it on my hands. And to know that that's your fault, to know that that's what you've done. And I understand the pain people feel that loved her and miss her. I feel that same pain. I feel that same hate for myself. I feel that same difficulty in understanding this. And I look back and I think, I always think, how did this possibly happen? Think, how could this have happened? How could this have happened?
News of Reeva's death and Pistorius' arrest spread instantly across the globe.
As Oscar Pistorius spends his 5th day in the South African jail, police sources are leaking incriminating information to media, including new claims that he may have been using steroids.
The beloved Blade Runner was now an accused murderer. Public shock turned to collective mourning for Reeva, who had championed women's rights and carved out a promising career. And therefore, as authorities formally charged Pistorius with murder, media outlets clamored for every possible detail. Was this a tragic accident or a domestic violence killing? The entire nation braced for a court battle that promised to be anything but straightforward. On March 3, 2014, the murder trial opened at the Pretoria High Court, presided over by Judge Thokozile Masipa. No juries exist in South Africa. Cameras were authorized, turning the courtroom into a fishbowl of global scrutiny. But then, even with the world watching, the facts and testimonies were as contested as they were complex. Led by prosecutor Jerry Nell, the state insisted Pistorius committed premeditated murder. In their view, an argument erupted that night, leading Reeva to lock herself in the toilet. Pistorius, enraged, knew she was inside yet fired anyway, and therefore, Nell focused on neighbors' accounts of screams, the destructive power of the black talon bullets, and Pistorius' prior history of reckless gun behavior. He hammered home the notion that Pistorius carefully aimed 4 times, aware of the high probability of killing whoever was behind that door, likely Reeva.
Reeva at that stage is 3 meters away from you, and she never uttered a word. She would be scared, she would shout out and talk to you. You're in the same room. In fact, you knew that Reeva was behind the door, and you shot at her. That is the only thing that makes sense. You shot at her knowing that she's behind the door.
It's not true, my lady.
Defense attorney Barry Rue countered that Pistorius, physically vulnerable without his prosthetics and terrified of an intruder, made a split-second mistake. His disabling anxiety, combined with a genuine fear of South Africa's crime rates, led him to fire reflexively. But then, once he realized it was Reeva, he panicked and acted with genuine remorse.
He looked at that toilet door. He was anxious. He was fearful. He foresaw that if necessary, he could fire. We're not saying that's not so. That's quite clear. Where Professor Derman came in, first of all, to explain to you why the accused on his stumps in that vulnerable physical state
would go to the toilet.
The defense branded the neighbor's woman's scream testimony as confusion, and therefore, any shrieks heard might have been Pistorius himself, who they claimed could produce a high-pitched scream under extreme distress.
In this instance, we had no exception. Everybody that heard the sound at that time identified it as a woman's voice.
Now, my lady, that if he says the 4 witnesses called by the state, that's a correct statement. If he says everybody, that's not correct.
I go as far as saying everybody, my lady, because I'm saying at that time. And if Mr. Roo would give me an opportunity, I said at that time. We're talking, my lady.
I wake up every morning and you're the first people I think of, the first people I pray for. I can't imagine the pain and the sorrow and the emptiness that I've caused you and your family. I was simply trying to protect Reeva.
Pistorius took the stand in a highly emotional testimony, often sobbing and retching as he recounted the shooting. He insisted he loved Reeva, had no motive to hurt her, and was devastated by the outcome. But then, prosecutor Nell tore into discrepancies in his statements, painting him as evasive and manipulative, contending that the story was tailor-made to dodge a murder conviction.
You heard the sound. What happened then?
I discharged the firearm, my lady.
Why?
Because I thought somebody was coming out to attack me.
So you wanted to shoot the person coming out?
I didn't want to shoot them, my lady.
What did you want to do?
I didn't have time to think of what I wanted to do. I was terrified, my lady.
You're thinking every step of the way. You're thinking about holding your gun, covering yourself. Now you want to tell the court, on this critical instant, I didn't think.
After months of argument and exhaustive expert testimony, Judge Masipa issued her judgment on September 12, 2014. She concluded that the prosecution did not prove beyond reasonable doubt that Pistorius intentionally killed Reeva, but therefore, she found him guilty of culpable homicide, manslaughter, citing his negligence in blindly firing into a locked cubicle.
Not guilty and is discharged. Instead, he is found guilty of culpable homicide. On count 2.
On October 21, 2014, Pistorius received a 5-year prison sentence. Judge Masipa emphasized that a reasonable person should have foreseen fatal consequences from shooting at such close range. Some South Africans believed justice was served. Many, especially women's rights groups, felt the outcome was far too lenient for the death of an unarmed woman. Pistorius served part of his sentence at the Kugosi Mampuru II prison in Pretoria, largely in the hospital wing due to his disability and high profile. He was described by officials as a model prisoner, avoiding disciplinary issues. But then, after about a year, he was granted release to house arrest under South African sentencing guidelines. Thus, in October 2015, he moved to his uncle's home, barred from public appearances, and therefore left to reflect on the tragedy in quiet seclusion. Yet this was not the end of his legal battles. An appeal was already in motion, and the question of whether justice had truly been done loomed over the nation. He entered prison as a national hero turned convicted killer. But the South African legal system had more twists and turns ahead, ones that would challenge the very definition of intent in homicide cases, upend the initial verdict, and provoke a storm of public debate. And therefore, as Oscar Pistorius tried to piece together the fragments of his once bright future, an appellate court prepared to revisit the tragic events of that Valentine's Day.
It is a proper application of state power to ensure that the law is correctly applied.